As the only American in the Ruth Borchard collection of British 20th century self-portraits, Ruth wrote to you whilst you were a student here at the Royal College of Art, I believe in early 1964, having seen your self-portrait in the Young Contemporaries show of nationwide students' work earlier in that year. Do you recall hearing from Ruth?
Yes, I lived up in East Finchley with a family, and a letter came there for me, and the letter said that, laid out the fact that she was buying British self-portraits, and had seen some of my work. I had I think two, maybe three. I think it was three things in the show, and she was interested in buying a self-portrait, and so I wrote her a letter in return, fessing up that I was not British but an American. I told her I would be very happy to. I'm recalling this because she saved the letter. That's what, I don't think I would recall what I had said. I had great amazement. She had saved that letter and it was reproduced in that book. So but she bought it, and I informed her that I was an American. And but she still, no questions, it was in the store. I got a check, which was amounted to 1 week's rent, and that's the story. And it was a nice thing, and I didn't forget it.
Oh. Today, David, that I thought you might find interesting, because this is actually the work.
This was, I know, I was emailed William Weinstein, who was 10 years old when I lived in East Finchley. He was their youngest child, and I had lunch with him the other day. But about a month ago, when this exhibition was up, I got an email from him saying how he walked into this exhibition and saw this bohemian-looking young man in there, and was me. And then he actually sent me a photograph. So I knew what the frame was like, and I thought, well, it's all framed up very nicely, isn't it? And
your work has the distinction of being one of only 2 lithographic prints amongst the 101 works in the Ruth Borchard collection. As you say, you were a somewhat impoverished student at the time, and although you didn't meet with Ruth Borchard, you corresponded with her.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And I thought you might be interested to see this on a scrap of drawing paper.
My terrible handwriting there, dear Ruth Borchard. Enclosed is self-portrait. It is not framed as you can best pick out. You can best pick out the frame you want. Also, it is quite awkward to send frame through mail. I will be waiting for your check and answer. Sincerely, David Freed. I hope you like the print. Well, that's interesting. 28 Midhurst Avenue. Yeah, that's where I lived. Well, so very young.
It's very interesting to see that, because amongst the archive of correspondence with Ruth Borchard, there's some very elaborate headed notepaper from established Royal Academicians. But obviously your work spoke to her, and this young student was someone she was determined to have in the collection. Was the print actually produced here at the Royal College?
Yes, yeah, it was printed down on a plate. I remember, printing it up on a plate, on one of the old-fashioned presses down there, and there's a lot of work.
To come to London in 1963 was a remarkable year, really, when you think of what that time was going on in the world. Everybody knows where they were when they heard the news that Kennedy had been assassinated. Do you recall where you were, David?
Yes, I was at the Royal College rather late in the day, and Norman Aykroyd said he'd heard something like that on the radio. I don't know that I even believed him, but I went home and our landlady was there, Val Weinstein, and she was at the door, and my wife was, and she said, "They shot your president, David." And I said, "Yeah, I think I heard that." And I know, boy, it was really. So what do you do? And we never contemplated returning or anything like that. The newspapers were where you got the news in those days. It was amazing. We ran out and would buy, they were putting out editions of the newspaper every few hours, and you would always want to get the most recent news. So we kind of, when I had a ride, I would decide I was going to give up coffee and drink tea. Well, I went back to coffee that night, I remember, because we listened to the radio and everything like that, trying to sort out what was happening. You know, he was our president. I remember coming over here so proud that he was our, and I'm very proud now. I'm coming over because Obama's our president. So it's nice to be proud of your president for a change. and I was very proud to have Kennedy as my president. And I always say that things started going downhill when they shot Kennedy. Everything went downhill. So hopefully it's now maybe starting back up. Maybe it's improving now. I don't know. It's hard to say.
You were born the year before David Hockney, who must therefore have been a contemporary of yours here at the college.
Yeah, he left the year before I think I arrived. He and Ron Kitai, and I didn't know the work of either one of these people, and I quickly found out who Hockney was because they were printing his prints in the shop there at the Royal College, and so you would see the plates, and he would be coming in, and come in and check things and so forth. And maybe I shouldn't say this, but when the printers would knock out, the students would run in there and knock off one. I know I'm not going to mention any names who did that, but whenever I see an unsigned Hockney, I think,
The cover image on the catalogue of your most recent retrospective exhibition is another, if somewhat older, self-portrait. Would you say looking at self has been an important element in your work?
Well, I've always done them. I did them even when I was a kid. And I guess it says something about your ego that you'll do that kind of thing. Sort of in my work, when I kind of come to a conclusion of a particular idea I'm working with, I fall back and I do portraits. I do a lot of portraits of people, and self-portraits are the easiest to do. I really like portraits. I'm quite well known around in Virginia for the portraits I do of people. I only do people I know. I have to know them, and I have to know them for long, because I don't particularly like to have them sit. I don't want to burden them having to sit in front of me, though they do that quite often. But I really rather work from my intuition and so forth, and what I remember of them, and so that's how I tend to do my portraits. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. When you have a portrait of somebody, they look at it, and you have this kind of feeling, and they don't quite know what to think of it. And sometimes people will say, I didn't know I looked like that, or the nose is wrong. I judge whether they're good or not the subjects, but other people that know that person, and if they will come up to me and say, you got him or her just right, you really nailed them, and I've had that happen a lot with me, and that's really, I know then it's all right, because the person you've done is all, you know, they're kind of, there's always this kind of, I can't imagine what people feel like when like somebody like Bacon or Freud do their portraits. I ran into a barmaid one time who, it was one of those club somebody took me to, and the barmaid knew Francis Bacon and said that she wouldn't let him paint her portrait for £1 million. She didn't think much of Francis Bacon either. But
with your self-portraiture, are we supposed to look at them as they represent you, or is there some other way that we should interpret them?
I don't know. You know, when I taught, I never taught from a philosophic point of view. I taught on a how to do it point of view. So that's what you want to do. Well, this is what you have to do, and you look at this artist or that artist, and it should help you. It's very hard to talk about my work, for me, to talk about my work other than give its context of when it was done, where and how I did it, and maybe what some of my thoughts were when I did it. And I'm especially when you get when you look at your older work like this is, it begins to have this feeling of that it was done by sort of somebody else. Biologists say that every 7 years we're a completely new person because we shed our cells. So I've been several people so far. Somebody said that that's what all the dust bunnies around under your bed is. It's just but I mean, I like artists to do portraits. I really, Hockney's portraits are some of his best work, and Ron Kitai's portraits I think are terrific, and Freud's portraits are wonderful, and of course Rembrandt and Goya and all these people. We don't know what these people look like quite often. And photography is its own kind of language anyway, so a photograph is not necessarily any more real than a drawing or painting. We assume it to be reality, but I don't think it's any more reality than almost anything else is. It's just the way photography is the way 21st century people tend to see their own self-image. I have a lot of friends who are photographers, and I get along with them very well. Like poets and photographers, I get along with them. Painters, not so much, for whatever reason.
You're on record as saying the year spent at the Royal College changed your life. What made you decide to come over to London?
I seem to like a lot of English art, and I would look at these things. And I actually saw some reproductions of like Carol Waite, who was professor of painting here in the United States. It's very unusual. But there were Ben Nicholson and all those people were, there was a lot of well-known British artists around, and so I always somehow liked their art. Then my father taught me to read, and he loved Charles Dickens. And I grew up in my family of my father referring to somebody as, that person's Uriah Heep, or that person's Mr. Micawber, Mr. Micawber. He classified people according to Dickens' characters. So I grew up, and of course you get a lot of, well, the other thing was, of course, I really did like English literature a lot. I read a lot of D.H. Lawrence and things like that, people like that. William Blake's poetry I loved a lot, and when I studied printmaking, there was a big emphasis on Blake because he was a printmaker and a bookmaker and a poet. So I had all this information already, and so I applied to England. What I started to say was there was only two individual. There was 100 a year that came to England. There was a painter who went to Slade, and I don't remember his name, and me that came here with printmaking at the Royal College. Those are the two visual arts people that year of the 100.
Very interestingly, you had this background in literature and an interest in portraiture, and in a way that sums up how printmaking must have been a natural route for you in that sense. And Britain, of course, has a strong tradition in portraiture. That
was another thing. I was never trained as a painter. I was going to be an illustrator. That was my career goal. And printmaking was a natural thing to fall into if you were inclined to want to be an illustrator. And I had to make a living, and so I actually was what we called a commercial artist at the time, and did some design work and stuff like that. But you know, I always really wanted to be a real artist, and printmaking was just it was really in its infancy as far as a boom went, and I kind of got in on a real big print boom right away there. And I had an exhibition here in 1970, and as a dealer was called Gordon and Millard. They were over off Cromwell Road, between Cromwell Road and Earl's Court. They had a gallery, and it was a print gallery, and they would buy huge amounts of prints from people and then take them and peddle them all over the place. And I think they bought something like 1,000 prints of mine. And so I hear via emails from all over in England and Scotland. Just before I came here, a couple in Scotland had some of my work. I lived in Mull Island, and they were architects, and they found me on the internet, I suppose Googled my name or something. And so I hear about these people that own these prints. And that was really an interesting time to be a printmaker. It's not quite like it. Only Norman can have those huge editions anymore because he's so popular. His work is so popular. Eddie Liddell, who was head of printmaking, asked me he used to come and ask me if I wanted to do this, or would I want to meet Henry Moore? I don't know why I said no. It was the dumbest thing I think I've ever done in my life, if I wanted to meet Henry Moore. I mean, I don't understand why I said no, but I did. And, but he asked me if my wife and I would like to come here and have lunch at the senior common room. I'd been eating lunch at the junior common room, which was pretty close to an army mess. And so I said, yeah, and he said, well, bring your wife along. And so Mary came in, and we couldn't find it. And finally we found it, and we were late getting there. We walked into a vestibule there, and then we looked in the room there, and there was the table, you know, not unsimilar to this arrangement. It was like a long table there with a number of people, and one of them was Francis Bacon. And so I came in and apologized for being late and was introduced around and so forth. Now, you want the Bacon story here? You know, all right. I didn't hear this. My wife says, who's very shy, but she's got very sharp ears. She said, as we were sitting down, he said, the children have arrived and we can eat now. She was pretty spooked at him anyway, and we actually ran into him another time over very early in the morning. It's a little story, I don't know how relevant it is, but ran into him over on Fulham Road early in the morning. We were between flights we were going to Amsterdam, and we had come in to have a breakfast before we caught our flight to Amsterdam, and it was very early in the morning when he was out, came kind of sliding across the street diagonally, and came right up to us and stood in the street and stared at us. All by himself. He was the most famous painter in the world at that time, and he stared at us for a while. And I said to my wife, we saw him coming. I said, that's Francis Bacon coming across there. And she said, yes, I know. And she was getting there, got real spooked. He was not she would have probably gotten along fine with him. But, and he stared at us, and I just we walked on, and he followed us for a while, and then, you know, turned off looking in the shop window or something like that. That was very strange because he was so famous at that time. He was off by himself out there roaming around, probably drunk. I saw Bacon's retrospective at the Metropolitan Museum in New York here just, you know, like a month or so ago, and it was an absolute knockout show. I mean, it just took your breath away. But I really came to the conclusion that really he is probably the last painter that can do that kind of thing, because he really continued that grand tradition of Western religious art into our century, and that's a very hard thing to do, and yet he was managed to do it, and I just don't think it's possible to do anymore, and I don't think anybody else has been able to do it, you know, where he brings in the Greek and Christian tragic traditions into his art and kind of gives them his own twist, to say the least. And
David, would the self-portrait you sold to Ruth Borchard be the first work that you sold whilst you were in London?
I think so, yes. I don't remember selling anything else here. I had sold work before. I've been rather fortunate, and I've rather consistently been able to sell work ever since I was quite young. But you know, I didn't show my work here at all. So that was maybe the only time I showed at that time in the Young Contemporary show. And I decided to. It was a juried show, and you submitted work, and so it was the only kind of. I swapped a lot of work with people, with other students and so forth. I did that. I did do that, if that counts.
Interested to see that she purchased this number 2 of 8 from the edition. Where do you think number 1 went?
I have one other one. When all that happened, I went through all my drawers, and I found one other. I don't know. I really don't know where. It's possible that more will turn up. It's possible I left some here.
Why an edition of 8? It seems an unusual.
Probably the stone or the plate. It was a plate, I think. It was a plate because I can kind of tell by the crayon drawing. It was a plate because that was the first time I'd done some work in stone lithography, very briefly at one time. But here they had these plates, and you could draw on these plates and ink them up. And you could they were easy to carry around. You could take them to the table you worked at. The lithography is pretty straightforward. You have to do a certain process in order to get the print proper, get the print properly print. And it can be under inked, or it can be over inked, and it can be over inked so much that the whole everything goes black, and it's just such a fickle process that I just was totally discouraged with it technically. Until I saw that offset, and I just vowed I will only do a lithograph if somebody would use one of those offset prints. I've never made many lithographs. This is really one of the 3 or 4 that I ever made.
How do you see your face? Is it coming out of the darkness, this dark region?
I just, looked at a mirror and drew the thing. I don't know, probably. I really don't know. Obviously, I had quite a mop of dark hair, and I did a lot of self-portraits in those days, and I tried different styles. I don't know what this was. Probably the Edvard Munch style here, or something like that. I would try some like Max Beckman or something like that. I was always fooling around with trying to figure out what was the best way. I really do think that, now I think about it, I really was. I was probably emulating him, is what I was doing.
Perhaps that's what appealed to Ruth Borchard, because of course Munch was well known in Germany, where she came from as a child. And
I think that's very interesting. It just kind of merged up out of as I remember, The way I worked really changed a lot while I was here. My work was rather satirical. I was accepted here as a student doing work, interestingly enough, that wasn't that far off from what Dave Hockney was doing, those Rake's Progress prints. They were similar to that. And only I didn't know who David Hockney was. And I think I came here, and the British pop movement was very much what they called it. Though guitar I never liked, nor hockey I never liked to be included in that group.